Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our series of dialogues we are hosting with the artists featured in CCCADI's digital exhibition, On Protest and Mourning. And this is an exhibition, a gathering of artists that help us answer this question of, while we engage in protest and uprising, how can we also mark the lives that have been irreparably damaged and lost? I'm Nadia Ali. I'm the curator of the exhibition, and I am so excited to welcome to our conversation our featured artist for the evening, Nadia Alexis, and her stunning, stunning portraiture series, What Endures. Welcome, Nadia. Nadia is, it's okay, you can say hello back.
Hi.
Nadia is of Haitian heritage, is a poet, a photographer, and educator who was born right here in CCCADI's neighborhood of Harlem. Her photography has been published and exhibited widely. She's also doing a really incredible undertaking, which is pursuing her PhD in creative writing at the University of Mississippi. And her poetry, which we're in for a treat because we'll get to hear a little bit tonight, has been published in Kweli Journal, the Indiana Review, Texas Review, among others. And audience, I want you to know that it's a very, very important week. It's Nadia's birthday week. So let's wish her a very happy birthday in the chat and on YouTube. And Nadia, you're spending your birthday week with us, so it means a lot to us. Thank you so very much for that.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Joining Nadia in conversation is Zainab Floyd, who, like Nadia, is of Haitian heritage. And Zainab is the founder and artistic director of Caribbean Archive, a collection of Black Caribbean women invested in agency and resistance. In the fall, Zainab will be a master's candidate at Columbia University in the African American Studies Department, where she'll be concentrating on Caribbean studies. I also want you to know that we're very proud of Zainab. She's also one of CCCADI's newly selected Curatorial Fellows in Afro-Caribbean Art. And part of the fellowship's mission is to provide our fellows opportunities for public scholarship, like tonight's conversation with our featured artist, Nadia. Zainab, thank you for taking on the challenge and welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So I wanted to share with you both, Nadia. I emailed you randomly and gushed about this body of work, and I'm so grateful for your participation in On Protest and Mourning. And as you know, poetry was really central to this project, and we paired each of the artists' work with a poem. And for your series, Nadia, What Endures, we paired it with this lovely poem by Alice Walker, Turning Madness into Flowers, #1, in which she writes, "It is our grief, heavy, relentless, trudging us, however resistant, to the decaying and rotten bottom of things. It is our grief bringing us home." And it was that line, our grief bringing us home, that really haunted me, Nadia, when I would really spend time with your work and going through the images in What Endures. And this body of work is such a poignant and meditative set of images on its surface. But a closer look, one can see that you are really reckoning with some formidable ghosts in these images. And those ghosts are the erasure done to Black women and the silence around the state violence that Black women have endured. And what really struck me about the work is that you ask us that when we are in mourning, and mourning is a privilege, when we are in mourning and we cry out the names that we've lost, that we also remember the names we are yet to know, and the women whose spaces for mourning were stolen. And your work, What Endures, is such a poignant reminder of that absence. So I want to thank you for creating such a beautiful work that moves me. And I know we've been hearing from our CCCADI audience that has moved them tremendously as well. So audience, we're going to hear from Nadia about this series, What Endures. She's going to treat us to some of her beautiful poetry. And then Zainab will join Nadia in conversation. As always, we want you to put your comments and your questions in the chat, whether you're watching us on Facebook or YouTube, and we will get to them and engage them in our Q&A section shortly. Nadia, the screen is yours.
So we can pull up the slides now. Perfect. Okay, we can go to the next slide. Okay, so in the What Endure series, I am interrogating questions around survival and danger concerning the lives of Black women who experience disproportionately higher rates of state and interpersonal violence and erasure in the US, Haiti, and elsewhere throughout the diaspora, and even beyond, you know, when we are thinking of places like that the US or England and places like that. So I'm thinking of a number of things in terms of survivors of domestic violence and sexual violence, to those who are re-traumatized by the legal system, and maybe sometimes community members who may fail to support them, or those who have been targeted by law enforcement, abused or neglected by them, lynched, etc. And so in this particular image, I'm thinking about duality, and I mean, you could arguably say multiplicity as well, but for the purposes of this, thinking of duality in nature and how that sort of mirrors duality in our own lives, in our experiences as Black women in this world, or Black people, period. And so how multiple things can be true at once, how things live and die in nature and beyond. Other works in this series that aren't depicted in this exhibition, but they're a part of the series, depict a woman who is wearing dark clothing and she's fleeing, almost like she's fleeing for safety. And so as we move through the series, this is where we arrive at the woman in white. We can skip to the next slide now. The woman in white, who's pictured here, and so she's sort of come to a place of transcendence. So she's still searching and seeking, but there's a level of transcendence that she has achieved. Go to my next slide on my screen. So in this image, I'm interested in spirit, in shape-shifting, all of them really, but this woman, who's me, I'm the woman pictured in these images. These are self-portraits that are in this exhibition, but not necessarily limited to my story. So I'm serving as sort of a representative of these ideas that I'm talking about. So this woman, this image of this woman figure, she's partially gone, but she's still there. And so that, to me, thinking about spirit and how we remember those who are gone, how we keep them alive, how we, maybe if we survived, how we remember the person that passed, the person that we once were, as we make our way through our own healing journeys in the aftermath of trauma. So in making these images, it was important for me that you couldn't necessarily tell exactly where they were made just by looking at them. Although there is significance to the place that I made them in Oxford, Mississippi, I wanted you to be able to think of it. It could be anywhere. It could be here in the US, it could be in Haiti, it could be anywhere where Black people, Black women are found. And so as I consider how our humanity is being disregarded in pandemic times, I present these images as a form of homage to the departed and the living, And so there's movement incorporated in it. And I was interested in that as thinking about the photograph as a fixed subject, is as a fixed object, but there could be movement within it. That to me felt like resisting in a particular way. Um, and so to speak a little bit more to this as a form of resistance, I do believe that they are a form of defense. The subject of the images is a free woman, and she's sort of a representative of the free women who are not pictured, or the women who had their lives, taken away from them. But there is, I guess, when I think about freedom, I think about freedom in the living realm, but I also wonder about it in the afterlife. And so thinking about people who may have had violent deaths, maybe by the hands of a partner or someone in law enforcement, what would it mean if they, what does the afterlife look like if there is one? Are they free there, etc.? We can skip to the next slide. Um, let's see. So this image, this is one of my favorites from the series. So I love that it was the featured image. But she's the subject here is confronting the camera, but you can't kind of see her face. So it seems, for me, I was thinking about her having agency and how she is, how she shows herself. And there's still movement here, and she looks sort of angelic. Um, and I have one of the image that I showed earlier with the disappeared head is part of a series of poems that I have titled Prayer to Essie Danto. And so when I think about spirit with this work, I was also thinking about Haitian voodoo, and specifically Essie Danto, who's known for a number of things, including being a patron saint for women and children who are survivors of. Um, of- she's also known as being vengeful, which is awesome, and also known as being significant to the Haitian Revolution. And so this image, I just was interested in a number of things, including the stance of the figure and how she has control over how she is portrayed. And we can skip to the next one, which I feel like is another form of freedom making, if we can call it that. In this particular image here, so the series, as you can tell, is kind of working narratively. So I don't have like a long story for each image, but how I chose to make my the movements that I chose to make as I was making these self-portraits, I was just sort of led intuitively. And so I was dancing, or I was getting in sort of like warrior kind of poses, for lack of a better way to put it. And often, every time I went out, I played music with me, played music in the background, loud on my phone. And it was always, some of you may know of DJ Sabine of Oya Sound Productions. I love her mixes, her house mixes that have African, Haitian, fusion, all those different things that she says so well, probably on her website, much better than I could. But for me, when I listened to that work, it made me think of it made me feel more connected to myself. It made me feel more connected to the spirits that I felt like I was carrying with me, or the spirits that may have passed through the place that I was making the images. Um, and so, just to say a little bit about, um, I guess, in the interest of time, I would just tell everyone to check out DJ Sabine's website and her Instagram, because she does amazing work. And I think some of the sounds in the background that you could hear on some of the mixes have nature sounds. It sounds like water or trees, it's drums. And so this felt like something that should be around every time I was making it. It got me in the zone. So next slide. And then this is the last image that is shown in the exhibition. And so there's no woman here. She sort of disappears, which I like to leave. I like that people can interpret these images how they want to, but I think that this is another way to think about life and death, and journey and transition. And perhaps the woman disappeared into the woods or went into the sky or something. Just, I think this is an opportunity to sort of meditate on some of the work that has been shown, as opposed to suggesting so much that that the fate for Black women is, disappearance. So I like to think of this as this sort of duality happening in this image too. And that's about it that I have prepared for the photographs. I can transition to the poems now. I'll read two poems, and one of them, the first poem I'm going to read, is a poem that is going to come up later in our conversation. So I thought that I would read it. So we'll go to that slide and zoom in a little bit. Okay, so this is called Thunder. I'll say a little bit about it. It's a hybrid poem. So this is a photograph that I made years before the What Endures series was made, and I kind of kept it around. And I didn't know what I was going to use it for, but I decided to use it in this photograph. So this, I'll just read it. This is kind of like a definition poem. Thunder. 1. Floor wailing louder under her feet each time she runs. 2. Where wind and bone meet. 3. God here, God gone. 4. Her face crashing through rain of his fist. 5. Trees altered by flooding. 6. The night before everything unfamiliar became a mirror. 7. Dead women of her leave ashes in her lungs. 8. The most whole he'll ever feel as a man in love. And then we can go to the next poem, which this poem is called Watershed. It's in the same poetry manuscript that Thunder is in, just to say briefly, the manuscript is concerned with, one of the things it's concerned with is thinking about surviving domestic violence. And so some of my poetry is connected in theme to some of the things that I'm thinking about in What Endures, as a survivor of domestic violence, but also as an artist. Watershed. I arrive at my father's feet, a dying mapu tree. He covers his eyes with mud while goats feast on my fallen hair. I hear my mother call for the Lord to send just enough rain for our lungs and her carnations to see a new season. My mother always says boys and men are best at taking. I remember the ones I loved who turned pomegranates in my yard into salt. In the mirror, I see a donkey's head without a home. Daisies dance atop her hair, and she teaches me how to wail for cover. My mother and I kneel on uncooked rice. Sweat of our hands no longer remembers its owner. Our knees become prunes. One night I see my father weep and rock like a forgotten river. How he must know what it's like to fight against disappearance. Every year, Lake Azui rises and forces change on the trees and birds and people of the watershed. They no longer believe the water will leave them. The longer I stay in the home my lover and I built on this mountain, the more I tire of circadian leaps into the field of cacti. I spend nights imagining a life without hail and the company of vultures. I make peace with the ways my father and I look away from errors and ruin. My parents make rituals of warning, and I follow in their footsteps anyway. My mother says I can build a new home from clouds, and I believe her. Thank you. That's all I got. We can
That was absolutely stunning, and thank you for sharing that. I was getting teary eyed listening and reading Watershed along with you. How are you feeling?
I'm
Like it's
good.
going on today and your birthday coming up.
Yeah, yeah, I'm good. I'm traveling tomorrow. I'm glad I made it to the event on time, and that's how I'm feeling right now. So
That's
everything worked out. I'm really glad to be here and to see all of your faces, and I'm grateful. How
yes.
are you?
I'm feeling good. I'm excited to be sitting here with you. I'm fangirling, but you already know because I already told you I'm a fan of your work. So I'm really happy to be in the same room with you and to be on the other end and speaking about you and your amazing artistry. So I really, really want to speak about your process from the clothing, the head wrap, and the selection of choosing Mississippi, and particularly that kind of forest.
Yeah, yes. Um, the first thing that comes to mind is how I came to. So I'll give a little bit of background information in terms of how before What Endures was born. So it was like January of 2018, and I was going through a lot of stuff in my life, personal transitional things going on, and I was like on my healing journey, and I needed a different outlet other than words to think about certain themes and issues that I thought about all the time, that I've been thinking about for years. And so I started doing photography in 2014, but I hadn't done it in the way that I did it when I began the What Endure series. So I went out, I had an independent study with a photography professor at the University of Mississippi, and I started making images on my back porch of my old apartment. And I was moving, and there were shadows and some of the things that you see in the images that ended up being the series. But it was like I was too confined by that space. And so my mentor was like, "Well, what if you went out into the woods?" And so I went out and did that, and I felt a little like, because I'm a little shy in terms of, because I was gonna have to move and things like that. I'm like, people might see me, but okay, if that's what might be calling, if that's what's calling in the work, then I'll listen. So I just went to different like trails and like woodsy spots of Oxford, and then I found this spot. It was perfect. And I just happened upon it. It's like by a parking lot. It's like to the left of it, the woodsy area. And I just happened upon it, and I was like, yeah, this is the spot. And I just started making the work there, and I kept going back in my hair wrap, in my white dress. I didn't have a car, so I had to Uber every time. So it cost him money and all that. But even the white dress was intuitive when I bought it. Like I saw it on it's in a boutique, and I was like, I need that dress. And then I ended up using it for that. But so everything was sort of intuitive. That's how I would kind of describe my process. I just kind of went out there, um, got in the zone, and did what I felt like was calling me to do things that were being whatever was calling me to do the things that I was doing. I was trying to listen to it. So I didn't really pre-plan shots so much in the beginning. I was just like, let me go and see. So it was the woman in the dark pattern at first, running, because I was, that's kind of like where I was. And then it became the woman who was more free and could stand, more sure of herself, etc. And so, yeah, the music, intuition, and just returning. returning to certain memories, returning to the place. Um, and so it was personal. It was very personal why I started it. And I feel like it changed my life on a personal level, but also, artistically as well. It definitely opened some doors for me and then helped me to think about photography in a new way for myself. Like I had been looking at other people's images, but I hadn't made work like that before. So yeah. Does that answer?
Absolutely lovely. That's lovely. I've been thinking, I wrote down what you said, returning back to like memories and places and being called to like literally the clothing, you were called to it. I wanted to also link Sadea Hartman's book, Wayward Lives. Immediately when I was looking at your work, I was listening to the playlist that was provided in the exhibition. I'm reading off of my notes here. In it, she speaks about silence and tapping into the archive because a lot of the subjects are Black girls and Black women and Black femmes who are nameless, at times faceless. You'll get an image of a Black child and the face would be like marked or colored or whatever. And I was really interested in seeing like how you tapped into the silences, you tapped into the invisible. How were you able to bring all of this trauma, all of this survival and joy and resilience, and put a name to it and make this all that is invisible, make it visible? Like, can you speak more about that?
Yeah, I think even with thinking about the issues of violence against Black women by the state, and also like intercommunal, like personal violence, like in those conversations, we're often erased. Like, when people think of like gun violence or whatever in the community or like community violence, they're often not thinking about domestic violence or sexual violence, or when we're talking about police violence, people are often not talking about Black women. And so I think um, there is a way that people are silenced by that, like maybe discouraged or like erased, their names erased, their stories, or the issue being erased, like it's something that's not a thing. So I was thinking about erasure, and I think that there's something significant about us existing in photographs, in art, but like, photography is my medium. There's something about us significant about us existing in photographs, because we can exist forever in that way. And so I like that idea. I like how you're thinking about Saida Hartman and archive and invisible and silence, because the photograph doesn't make any noise, but you're looking at it and they say, a photograph, you can say so much about a particular photograph and certainly about a series of photographs. So I'm interested in how, I don't know, the figure, but also the movement, etc., can make you, uh, can give voice in a particular way, can say something rather. And yeah, so does that answer? Mhm.
Wow. I
I love
I
your
wrote,
head wrap also, by the way. I love your head wrap.
I
Okay.
got it in my little hood, my little neighborhood. There's a Guyanese shop not too far away where I live. I live in Mount Vernon. There's a place called the Ave, and it's a very Caribbean neighborhood, Black American Caribbean neighborhood, and I bought that from there. So I love that you had the head wrap. I'm like, okay, you got the head wrap down.
Yeah, the head wrap. It's something about wearing a head wrap that makes you
Mhm.
feel some kind of way. And I know that I feel like more, I don't know, alive, more myself, more queenly, something when I wear it. But there's also the spiritual significance of the head covering. Like mine is not a white head covering. I don't practice Haitian voodoo or anything like that, but I have been learning about it. And so, yes, the head wrap is definitely an important cultural marker and something that felt intuitive for me to select to include.
Yeah, and speaking of that, like, how did you, when you were wrapping your hair,
Mhm.
um, and how were you able to keep it consistent? Did you snap it in one shot, like have that the same head wrap style? Because you could wrap it in different styles. How was that
No,
process?
I tied it the same. I tied it the same way every time. And that's how I normally tied it when I wore my head wrap. So it was like, it wasn't very hard for me to go back to it. Thank goodness. But yeah, I tied it the same way. And it's, the images are black and white, but they were, it's a colored head wrap. It's red, yellow, and blue, which is not necessarily important for the image. However, it was important for me wearing it because of how it made me feel. So, yeah.
I love that. I love that.
Mhm.
I want to like dive more into like the intimacy of your images and seeing you in movement. I'm interested in learning more about how the process of your movements were. Like, was that also intuitive, or were they planned? And did you go a series of multiple movements?
Yeah, I think so. At first, it was just kind of just, you know, see what comes or whatever, what I'm going to do. And then I had to sort of think about how I was going to mix it up some. So I had to sort of figure out how I was going to put my hands next, and like why. And yeah, so that's sort of like the short answer to it. Yeah, I don't know if I have, did I answer your question sort of?
You did. You did. You
Okay.
did. You answered
Yeah.
it wonderfully.
I love when photographers uh, bring movement into their images. It's sort of like to say, I'm alive, I'm here. There's something happening here, or something happened. And so I just like how movement made me think about that, but also journeying. And I think there's something about a Black woman being able to decide how she's going to move her body, right? And be photographed. And it's not an image of a Black woman who is harmed or what have you. She's standing up, she's turning away if she wants to, etc. So I thought that was very important.
Mhm. I agree. And the fact that you were able to capture agency and autonomy, oftentimes that's very difficult to find a Black woman that is the main subject, focal point of the work, where it where they are not hmm, oftentimes riddled by trauma, or like that's trauma porn or what people like to call it.
Mhm.
And that's my most favorite part about your work. Let's speak about you having an exhibition in Havana, Cuba. Like, I want to hear about that. Like, what did that mean to your work? What did it newly unfold for your piece and the selections that you showed from What Endures?
Yeah, that was an amazing experience. It was also a learning experience. It was my first time exhibiting internationally, and there are people of African descent in Cuba, so that felt significant, and I definitely saw that all around. And I think that it allowed me to sort of think about the work um, on a global level. That wasn't the first time I thought of it, obviously, but being in Cuba made me think about how what I'm thinking about is not just limited to the U.S. And how we're connected across water bodies and things like that. And so it was interesting to see. I mean, even though it was in Cuba, there were quite a few people from all over the world because it was a part of the biennial. So it's quite a few Americans that were there who thought about, when they saw the work, they said that they thought about slavery, like someone fleeing, running to freedom, um, that kind of thing. And then, so there was, I can't even really remember everything, but it was like similar. Like some people saw things that I hadn't thought of before, and some people saw things that I had thought of before. So, yeah, I think that it was. It made me realize how important it was to be making the work. So, yeah.
Did that like deeply impact your work? How was
Um,
that?
as far as the impact on my work, I think that, um, to be honest, it just made me feel like I should keep making work. That there is a place for me, that I have something to say, and that there's room for me at the table. Especially being able to look at the work of other artists, not just in our exhibition, which was a group exhibition for a fellowship program for artists of color, artists and scholars of color. And we exhibited alongside our mentor, Carrie Mae Weems. So that, I mean, I was looking at Carrie Mae Weems' work when I started. I was like, so I can't even believe that I did that fellowship program. So I'm so grateful for that. And she even said, which is not a bragging note at all, but she said that when she saw my work, that's when she realized that's when she came up with the idea to invite us to Cuba with her, to exhibit with her. So I have it on video and everything. I have
Yes.
it on video, so it's saved on my computer and backed up and everything like that. So I have it, and so I think there's something about seeing other people's work, having people see your work, and having your work seen by mentors and other people in the art world and out of it, that I think it just kind of made me feel like I should continue as far as impact on my work. And I also have a series that I'm working on that has color in it. So I have most of my images are black and white as far as like the art photography. And so I am interested in color also. And I think that, Cuba has so much color all over the place, and it certainly appeared in people's artwork. And so I think that that's, in a way, I would think that it influenced me in that way also. So hopefully that work will be out in the world at some point in the next couple of years. So yeah.
I can't wait to see that
Thank
as
you.
well. So my last note is, can you speak about your poem Thunder and like the similarities that this piece has? Do you start out writing a poem first and then you do the photography, or a combination of the two? How is that like?
Yeah, I like that you connecting thunder to the visual work, because I wrote thunder a couple years before I made the photographs for In What Endures. And so there's not that direct connection in that way. But I am in the woods, like literally like upstate New York somewhere, in that photograph that's in that poem. So as far as that, those are some of the things that poem is specifically about, an instance of, or instances of, domestic violence. So there's sort of snapshots. But in reading it again for this, prior to this, and at the event, I think that there are other ways to interpret it. Also, just like maybe some of the lines, and thinking about what it means to be a Black woman in America. And so, like a line like "God here and God gone," and what does that feel like? What might that feel like if you're thinking about someone like Sandra Bland, who was, murdered by police or whatever, in a jail cell, etc. Or let's see, the night before everything familiar became. So I think that some of these lines can work in multiple ways, and I'm thinking of the interior, but also what's happening externally. Um, and I mean the poem, the woman that's referenced in the poem is still there, but it ends on this male figure who was being violent against her. So, when you see the word thunder, you're thinking about sound and movement also, but just maybe not in the same ways that movement is appearing in What Endures. But yeah, certainly in my poetry, I am thinking about some of the same things. And I also have some poems that are not in the manuscript, but poems that I wrote as I was thinking about people like Sandra Bland or Marissa Alexander, or a lynching victim in Mississippi named Cordella Stevenson. So yeah, does that answer? Yeah.
Yes, it did. I think this is like we're closing out for the questions. Thank you so much. It gave me a lot to think about. And I'm going to always continue to return to your work always and forever. So yeah, you answered it just great.
Perfect.
Hey, Grace.
Hi. Audience watching, fellows watching, please pop your questions and comments into the chat. We'll bring them to Nadia and Zainab shortly. Nadia, I wanted to talk about what endures in the context of On Protest and Mourning. And I am thinking about your lovely, generous, immediate response to my random email about this project, and how, you know, I was thinking about what endures and how it might fit as a featured part of it. And what I was really struck by is not only do you set this body of work in a Southern landscape, which, as you say, has a lot of historical intentionality behind that, but is that you also return us to the natural world. And so much of grief and loss requires us to return to the natural world, whether it is the literal soil under our bare feet or the ocean and the water and the sea. And so I wonder if you could talk about not just placing what endures in the Southern landscape, but in a very natural state, and your thinking behind that choice.
Yeah. You know, when I moved before I moved down to Mississippi, I had visited. I used to go there every year for a conference, and I've always been struck by the natural landscape there in a way that has good feelings. Like it makes me feel good, but I also think that, you know, it's Mississippi, so I can't help but think about you know, the different kind of violent things that have happened to Black women and Black people in the natural landscape, a place that you would think is somewhere you could feel safe or go to be free, which I think is true. And I think it's also a place that can be kind of scary, and a place where you know, people are harmed or killed. And I think that I was interested in how it could be both of those things. And, you know, I think it was just, you know, always on my mind, the significance of living in Mississippi and walking through, and maybe what the trees have witnessed. The trees have been there forever, what they've witnessed, who's still around in those trees, like who might be, you know, what spirits might be floating around certain trees. And so, yeah, it felt very natural. I didn't feel like this could be indoors. It felt like it had to be outdoors. And I think that I guess the natural world it's definitely significant to the work. And I think it's also sort of like a background in a way, because I'm sort of privileging the human figure there. But I think that when thinking about Black people's relationship to the outdoors, it's definitely one that's complex, and I think it's complex because of the history and the, you know, present, because, you know, there's still stuff happening to us out in nature. So yeah, I mean, I think there's so much life and so much death, and there's so much possibility. I felt like there was so much possibility in using the natural world as part of the work. So
this phrase and this idea, and I say idea because I think we're still trying to define it, of safe space And both you and Zainab have said it over the course of our conversation. And I guess, what are the safe spaces for mourning, particularly for Black women, women of color? But do you have an idea, a sense of what are those safe spaces? What do they look like? What do they sound like? What do they feel like? Do they actually exist?
You know, I think they do exist. I know that they don't exist at the same time, right? So, like, we like to say that because it's sort of true, but it sounds so hopeless to just to end it there. Like, you know, of course, I know that anything could happen anywhere at any point. You know, I could get, you know, as far as a police officer or something like that. But I think that I have to think of it as I have to think of nature as a place that we can be safe. I have to think of like us being in, you know, a group of Black women being together as a place that is a safe space. So I do think safe spaces exist. I just think that they exist within a greater within a context in a larger environment that is unsafe. And so, you know, I guess by virtue of that, you know, there is a risk. Um, but I think we have to sort of lean into the fact that safe spaces do exist. I love that you brought up earlier the idea of us returning to nature in mourning, whether that's somebody going outside to, I don't know, you know, grieve, or going, someone being buried, and how we, you know, commune with each other to outdoors to bury someone. I think that we sort of intersect with nature so much. And so I think that you know, there are reasons for that. And I think part of the reason is because there is safety there, despite the lack of safety that exists also.
You know, showing, I wanted to tell you that I was at your opening in Havana, and it
Oh,
was,
I remember your face. I remembered it because because you emailed me, I was like, I've seen her before. I Googled you and I was like, I've seen her. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
it was amazing, and it reminded me, you know, that whole experience in Havana, and not only what art we put up, but where. I mean, the space that Carrie gathered you all in was such a wonderful space. It wasn't a white cube. It wasn't an art space. It was somebody's house, and it was the best thing, that blessed place that we could gather. So I wanted you to know that we'd been crossing paths even before this digital space. You know, when you made this work before the world changed last year, and changed so dramatically. And I wonder, and you didn't make it in the context of well, no one would have predicted the millions of people that have been impacted by this pandemic and loss. But we have this opportunity now to read what endures in the context of a year of incredible loss and incredible sorrow and incredible grief. And I wonder if you, as the artist, as the maker of the work, return to what endures after the last year that we've had. And if it shifted for you, if you looked at it differently, if it moved something differently for you than when you originally made it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that yeah, the pandemic has been quite the experience, and I think that, you know, one of the things that you know, endures in the aftermath of so much loss, such a turbulent time, is are the memories of the people that we have. And I just feel like art was so significant this past year, and it helped us to sort of I don't know, help some of us sort of stay afloat. And I think that, if anything, I think it makes me think about the importance of seeing our stories in photographs and other art mediums, and whether that's, you know, directly, there's different ways to talk about these issues. And I think that we see that in this exhibition from the other wonderful artists. And I think that it just makes that work feel more important and necessary. And yeah, I like thinking about, you know, this is a weird thing to say after just talking about death, but I like imagining us alive. And so I think that that can look a number of ways. And I, as far as returning to my work, I think that it makes me think about us alive in a particular way, and it gives me some hope.
Thank you for that. I love that line. I like imagining us alive. Zainab, your fellows are in the comments with questions. So Nadia, we're gonna switch to Natalie Willis, one of our curatorial fellows, is asking this question to you, Nadia. What would be, and these are all curators, so they're going to come at you with the curatorial questions, right? What would be your ideal non-institutional setting for what endures? And Natalie is saying,
No.
I'm back.
Okay. I thought that, okay, great. I thought that was by today.
The internet. What can we do? Where did I cut off? What did you hear?
What would be your ideal non-institutional setting?
And Natalie is saying that, you know, these pieces feel more like invocations to her. So where would you like to see it?
I feel like that's such a good question, because I've never thought about that before, you know, outside somewhere. I mean, I don't know, outside in some trees, outside. I mean, you know, like in a woods, like there has to be trees nearby, you know, not just like New York City trees that are, you know, on the sidewalk, maybe something like that. Um, or yeah, in a park or something somewhere. I love that question because I've never thought about that. I think the natural things would be outside somewhere with some trees.
I'm also curious about the medium because, you know, you were talking about movement, and there's so much movement inherent in the work. And I wonder what kind of actual materials could we also think about to enhance that movement? You know, is it textile? Is it, you know, blowing in the wind? And this is us curators getting a little ahead of ourselves.
No, that's beautiful. That's amazing, because I never thought about that. And you know, it's making me think about stuff that I've seen other artists, you know, do. I've always wanted to do like well, as long as I've known about it anyway, like some type of installation art type thing or whatever, where the images can move or they can be other things worked in. And so that's what that's given me. That's given me like installation art exhibition vibes. So I appreciate that.
Well, I can tell you might get some inquiries from our fellows because they seem like they have a lot that they want to ask you. Our next question is coming from Thando, and she wants to know, out of curiosity, what other mediums do you feel would lend themselves to the questions and issues we're grappling? That's my bad. We just talked about that. I'm sorry. But do you have any additional thoughts on mediums?
Yeah, I
Nadia?
mean, I definitely think video. I think video. I want to do something with video. I'm studying, so I'm still looking at what other artists are doing. But yeah, video. Shoot, I'm just thinking about visual, but um, yeah, video installation, that kind of thing, definitely. Um, I love these questions. All the questions
Great.
today.
We have more. So Jonathan Square is asking, many scholars of, this is the Fashioning the Self cat, many scholars of Caribbean literature have drawn connections between geographies in Faulkner's well-known Mississippian work and Caribbean geographies. And can you, as a Haitian American living in the Mississippi, make connections between these two landscapes and these two parts of the world?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that yes, I feel like I would be better able to answer that question once I finally make it to Haiti to make some more images. I want to add some images of my grandmother. I'm in this series, also my mom, and I want to add her thinking about this idea of lineage. But yeah, in terms of, so off top, I think that my first thought after that is thinking about the legacies of violence in both spaces. Slavery didn't just happen. For instance, slavery didn't just happen here in the U.S. It happened in the Caribbean. And so we have that experience. Also, different instances of violence against women. Violence against women is an issue here and there, and so I think that. Um, yeah, I think there's definitely some connections there that I'd be interested in exploring more. And I'm really eager to be able to get back to Haiti to sort of sit with that more in person. Yeah, that's funny that you brought up Faulkner, um, because Faulkner is really important to the University of Mississippi, so I hear about him all the time. But yeah, I definitely think there's connections there that I'm interested in exploring more. So thank you for that question.
Mm-hmm. We
and
have
I want to know about the. I'm sorry. I just want to say I'd be interested in reading some of the literature that might talk about some of those connections. So I know there's something called the Global South and things like that. So yeah, that's it.
Wonderful. Well, Zainab and Nadia, we've come to the end of our time together. And before I offer final remarks, Zainab, final thoughts, closing thoughts from you?
I just want to say I'm so grateful to have spent this evening with you all today. And I've been jotting down notes and writing stuff down. So it's been a beautiful evening to spend with y'all.
Thank you. And thank you for your wonderful investment and questions for Nadia. Big thanks to our fellows and watching. It's been a long day for you, so I appreciate all your questions too. And Nadia, it was, first of all, such a joy to have you in this project. For our folks watching, we've been doing these conversations with our artists starting from March, and Nadia is our final artist. So we are ending on a very high note by talking to you, and we definitely plan to have it around your birthday. That was all intentional on our parts.
I'm happy this is a part of my birthday week.
Thank you. We appreciate that. For our folks watching, On Protest and Mourning .digital will be up on CCCADI's site. We will archive it for you. We'll also be doing a lot of educational resources around it, so it's there for you, even though this is our last actual conversation with the artist featured, but we will still have it there for you. As always, I want to thank our incredible CCCADI staff behind the scenes and in front of the scenes, making this exhibition possible, and a very special shout out to our amazing producer, Kat Lazo, who always holds us down. Thank you, Kat, and good night, everybody. Thank you, Nadia. Thank you, Zainab.
Thank you.